This morning, I was discussing with you some of the basic ideas and feelings of Chinese philosophy, and in particular, Taoism, which underlies the development of Zen Buddhism and the whole Chinese attitude toward life, nature, and art. I suppose, of all the ideas we discussed this morning, the most important was the concept of the mutual arising of things. That is, the idea that you and your world go together, much like bees and flowers. But we're not brought up, in our culture at least, to feel this. Instead, we often feel as if we are confronting nature, something alien, something outside of us, rather than something from which we come. Yet it's possible to shift our everyday consciousness to feel yourself as something that the universe is doing. It's as if you change your center of gravity, your center of operations from that, end quote, little man inside the head, end quote, the ego, to the whole universe doing it. Now then, what I want to do this afternoon is shift from Taoism to the introduction of Buddhism into China and the birth of Zen, to explore what Chinese Zen is. But first, we have to take a quick look at what Buddhism, as a product of India, actually is. It's often said that Buddhism is Hinduism stripped for export. You see, Hinduism is a way of life that goes far, far beyond what we in the West call, end quote, religion, end quote. It involves everything: cookery, everyday family life, house building, just everything. It's the whole Hindu way of life. So you can't export it wholesale, just as you can't export Shinto from Japan. It belongs to the soil and the culture. But there are essential elements that can be transmitted outside the culture of India, and Buddhism is one of the ways of doing just that. But the Chinese didn't see it that way. They couldn't see that it was a dissipation of energy. So what they wanted was a way of living Buddhism and being. So, you see, the nature of this game is the Zen game. And I seem to have given away the show to you, told you all the inside mechanics of it. But you would discover that if you tangle with the Zen master and you think you know, from what I had told you, what the mechanics of it are, and you stuck your neck out to put yourself in the position of being an inquirer, everything I had told you would be useless. He would outwit you completely. That's what consists in being a master. He's not doing it because he wants to be superior or put down other human beings. He's doing it out of great compassion because he feels he knows something which, if you could find out, you would just be so happy. And you would want to give it to everybody else, but you can't give it away because everybody's already got it. All you've got to make them do is see that they have it, and that you don't give it to them. And that's the most difficult task. Yesterday, I was giving you a general outline of the foundations of the Zen feeling for naturalness in art and life by describing the fundamental principles of Taoist philosophy and then of the Zen discipline itself. And we saw that the roots of the idea of spontaneous living make this concept. Well, rather, don't accept such a concept as doing something much more subtle than might ordinarily be imagined. A lot of people think that the spontaneous or completely natural life, as it's understood by these Far Eastern philosophers, is to act according to whim. There was, for example, a great Zen monk who lived shortly after 1000 AD, who had a very peculiar way of painting. He had long hair, and he would get very drunk on rice wine. He'd soak his hair in ink, then slosh it all over the paper. Then he would do a sort of Rorschach test on it, and decide what kind of a landscape it actually was. And then he'd put in the finishing touches, and suddenly, out of this apparent mess, a great landscape would be evoked. The whole art of it was in putting in the finishing touches. It's a curious thing. If a person untrained in painting makes a mess with the brush, it's liable to be just a mess. Whereas if a person who has a feeling of painting in them for a long time makes a mess with the brush, or just does anything, it looks interesting. And that's why, if you try to copy the best people in modern abstract, non-objective painting, you find it's a very difficult thing to do, because there is more to spontaneity than caprice and disorder. And I want to try and explain what that is. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we could live absolutely on the spur of the moment, not make any particular plans, not feel that, well, you might make plans, because you can make plans spontaneously, but not to worry about whether you had made the right decision, whether you're being good or bad, selfish or unselfish, and not to hesitate in anything. You see, one of the great applications of Zen, as I pointed out, was to the art of fencing. And when you learn fencing, You see, you have to learn to be spontaneous, because here of all places, it is true that he who hesitates is lost. If you're engaged in combat, and you stop to think what sort of a defense or attack you ought to make, the enemy's got you. So, the way they teach people spontaneity in fencing is very interesting. When you first start fencing school, you, of course, live with the teacher. You're given a janitorial job. You clean up, wash dishes, put bedding away, and things like that. But while you're going about your daily business, the master surprises you with a practice sword, which is made of 4 strips of bamboo, rather loosely tied together. And he hits you with this, surprisingly and suddenly from nowhere. And you're expected to defend yourself with anything available. With the bedding, the broom, pots, pans, just anything to defend yourself. The student never knows when the attack is coming, or from where, or in what direction it's coming, and he begins to get tense. He goes around everywhere on alert, watching, which direction is it coming from? If he goes down a certain passage, feeling the master's probably lurking around that corner, and he's all set to go for him, then wham! He gets that practice sword and suddenly gets hit from behind. So, eventually he gives up. There's absolutely no way of preparing for the attack. And so, he wanders around feeling, well, if it's going to hit, and then he is ready to begin fencing. Because if you prepare for an attack from a specific direction, and it comes from some other direction, you have to withdraw from the direction in which you were expecting it, and send your energy in another direction, and that takes time. So what you do is you go around with a mind of no expectation. That is called mushin or monin. This is a very important Zen expression, and mushin means an empty mind. This mu, this no. The no in this no mind is called mushin. You could also call it no heart, because the character shin means both heart and mind. But it doesn't quite mean the same as our word heartless, as we use it. And it doesn't mean mindless in the sense of stupid. To be in a state of mushin is to have a mind like a mirror. And as the Taoist sage Chuang Tzu said, the perfect man employs his mind as a mirror. It grasps nothing. It refuses nothing. It receives but does not keep. When anything comes in front of the mirror, it reflects it instantly. The mirror doesn't wait to reflect it. They also say, when the moon rises, all bodies of water instantly reflect the moon. They don't bother with physics about the speed of light, or anything like that. It's irrelevant. When you clap your hands, the sound issues immediately. It doesn't stop to consider whether it will issue. And sparks from flint, when struck, issue instantly. But to do this, you can't try to be quick. So, if you have a Zen master who corners you with a funny situation, puts you in a quandary expecting spontaneous action from you, don't try to hurry. I once watched Suzuki wait a whole minute before answering, but he didn't hesitate. He wasn't embarrassed by the wait, and he could answer with silence just as well as with a formal response. The point is, do something. When 2 young Americans went to study Zen, they were taken by a Japanese monk to interview the master and act as interpreter. One of them had had some practice, knew a bit about it, and so, after they had had tea together and just discussed formalities, the master said, in a very easy way, "Well, what do you gentlemen know about Zen?" One of these students threw his fan, still folded, straight at the master's face. The master slightly moved to one side, and the fan went right through the paper wall. And the master laughed like a child. That's the sort of game they play. Once, a master was walking through the forest with a group of students. He picked up a tree branch, as one might pick up a tree branch, and suddenly turned to one of his students and said, "What is it?" The student hesitated, so he hit him with the branch. Another student was there, and he said, "What is it?" The student replied, "Give it to me and I'll tell you." So, the master tossed him the branch and he took it. Now, you may think Zen can be kind of rough, but let me give you another story, which is on a rather different level. A certain Zen priest was having dinner at a big party, and the party was being served by a geisha girl who was so elegant and skillful in serving that he suspected she might have had some Zen training. So, he decided to try her out. He nodded to her, and she immediately came to his place and sat down in front of his little low table. See, everyone was seated in front of low tables all around the room, with the geisha serving people moving up and down the middle. She came and sat down in front of him and bowed. He said, "I would like to give you a present." She replied, "I would be most honored." Now, on the table, there were little braziers with charcoal, and you moved the charcoal around with iron chopsticks. He took a piece of charcoal out with the chopsticks and offered it to her. She had long sleeves on her kimono. What she did was this. She wrapped them all around her hands, took the charcoal, and went to the kitchen. She disposed of the charcoal, changed her robe, which had holes burned all the way through the sleeves, and came back. She sat down in front of the master and bowed. Then she said to him, "I would like to give you a present." He replied, "I would be most honored." She picked up